present are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearbaugh, CO, Mitchell, Dillon, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Councilwoman McClellan will be absent tonight from both the work meeting and regular meeting. From city staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Police Chief Hart. I don't believe DPW Director Fordyce is here. Treasurer Bennett was here. Excuse me. Oh, where is she? Oh, she's in the back. Okay. And then Administrative Assistant Getchman is also here, along with our Labor Counsel, Steve Gerard. The rest of you who are present this evening, I'd encourage you to sign in the back to my left. You can pick up copies of the agenda on the back table. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved.
Moved by Mitchell. Is that a second by Dillon?
Yes.
Thank you. To approve the agenda as submitted, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. How about a motion to excuse the absence of our council colleague Heidi McClellan?
Moved.
Second.
Moved by CO, seconded by Tahar. All those in favor of excusing the absence signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We come to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? There are no citizen comments. Then we'll proceed to the one and only discussion item of the evening. We are revisiting the city personnel policy. Steve, Mr. Gerard, excuse me, do you recall where you left off 2 weeks ago?
I believe what happened was I was requested to speed through my discussion of the overall comments, which I did. And then we proceeded to have some additional comments on some open issues, but I'm not quite sure how far we made it through. I thought we were going to, this time, there's a couple of things that we did differently, so you should have the new version. I made a number of changes, and Elle made a number of changes as well. We've got a glossary in the back of terms, which was suggested at our last session.
Yep.
That really isn't actually something that I see in a lot of handbooks these days, but I think it's probably helpful here. But there is a glossary back there with some of the more common terms that we have in here that is helpful. We also updated the harassment policy, the reporting mechanisms, as we discussed last time, particularly dealing with issues of, well, what happens if it's the city manager who is the individual, either the complainant or the person who is the alleged harasser. So there's some updated information associated with that. Other than that, I think you guys have had this since last week, so I would just leave it open at this point in time for questions.
All right, well, Mr. Campbell, do you have any comments at this time? No? I have one more of a comment, really, Mr. Gerard. So subsequent to our last meeting, Eric Grossman, a former DPW employee, came to visit me. We discussed a variety of issues. He either had watched our most recent work meeting on Channel 18 or online, and wanted to follow up and provide some clarification to one of the issues we discussed, which was an hour-long lunch break.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, and I'll provide this document to you for your records, it is a copy of the Teamsters Collective Bargaining Agreement effective July 1, 1989 to June 30th, 1992.
Okay.
And the genesis for the hour-long lunch apparently came from management at that time,
Okay.
mayor, city manager, and DPW director. As you correctly noted 2 weeks ago, I believe it's a federal law that employees are granted 2 15-minute breaks.
No, I did not say that.
No, is it not a federal law?
There is no federal law that
Okay.
requires employees to have any breaks. Most people believe there is a law that says, I'm entitled to my 15-minute breaks. Unless you're a minor, under the minor work rules, there is no law that requires any break or any lunchtime. It is purely a matter of contract and or policy.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I learned something tonight.
Yes.
Because I thought that was in
Nope.
statute.
Nope.
Well, good to know. However, I think you would agree, Mr. Gerard, that's a pretty common practice of
Universally accepted practice.
a lunch and 2 15-minute
Yes.
breaks. So the genesis for the hour break was prior to this collective bargaining unit. Teamsters had a half-hour lunch and then 2 15-minute breaks during the day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And apparently what was determined by management is that was not effective because it required individuals to often leave the sewer line they were working on, return to the DPW office, take a break, and then return to work. And you were often using more than 15 minutes.
Oh, yes, that's
So
not that uncommon.
the 2 15-minute breaks were combined with the half-hour lunch to create an hour lunch period, which, and of course, the goal of the city of Saline then, which is now, is to create parity amongst the various bargaining units. So just a little bit of background on that.
That makes sense, that for efficiency standpoint, I've seen that in some of my DPWs and other community road or county road commissions, because there are some contracts that allow the employee on their breaks to be able to go back to the shed or the barn, and by the time you get people back from their break and then shuttle them back to the workplace, you've lost a half an hour or 45 minutes.
Well, more than 15 minutes.
So it's sometimes much more effective.
Mayor Pro Tem, can you, that doesn't mean we have to maintain that policy in perpetuity, but I wanted to provide some context, and I appreciated Mr. Grossman sharing that with me, and I indicated to him that I would relay it to City Council and to you, Mr. Gerard. And that's utilize that document however you wish.
Yes, no, thank you, I appreciate that.
I have a copy as well.
I'm glad Eric was out there and watching.
Yes. It's always good that people pay attention.
It
to us.
is, it is.
Yeah.
And while I was negotiating contracts in 1989, I wasn't doing it here.
You were not. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add at this time?
No, at this point,
Okay.
I'm just here to answer questions.
Okay, you highlighted the changes that were made subsequent to our last meeting based on the discussion and comments made by council members. I know many of you have a litany of questions, which is great, and we have ample time to address those. So I'm going to start with Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, and then I will end following Mr. Gearbaugh. The floor is yours. Ask away to staff or legal counsel, and when you're done, we'll move to Mr. Seal.
Okay, thank you. I have just one question.
Sure.
Not sure this is on. Okay, oh yeah, okay. So just one question, and this is on page 18 of the manual, the section
18
of the manual.
the
Page
revised one or the-
119, okay, page 119 of 219 in the packet. So the first full paragraph, the city of Saline prohibits any form of harassment and so on, that paragraph. So I would like to suggest adding one more item there, and that is to reflect language that we have in our non-discrimination ordinance, and that is gender identity / expression. All of the other things we have called out
How
in
is
the
that missing from there?
in the ordinance are here, not exactly in the same order, but that doesn't matter. But I just noticed that one is missing, so I'd like to suggest including
No, it
that.
should be included. It was intended to be included.
Okay.
I thought it had been included.
And like Mayor Pro Tem Tahar indicated, Steve, that language mirrors what's in.
Yeah, and we intended to, when we were updating this, we intended to mirror exactly what was in the ordinance that was
Okay,
updated.
well,
If
so-
it doesn't, we certainly
No,
can update that.
yes, so I will say it does not exactly mirror.
All right.
It includes all of the terms in the ordinance, but not
will
exactly in the
happen.
same way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
That's it. Mr. Seal, any questions?
No, sir, nothing.
Okay, then we'll move to Councilwoman Dillon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the glossary.
Yeah, no problem.
Big thing for me.
You can thank Elle for that. She was the one who put that together.
I have a couple questions. One is about the harassment part that was just
Yes.
updated.
All right?
I guess first, let me backtrack and say, city council are not employees of the city.
Nope.
So I don't understand how we're referenced into this policy manual. I mean, there's definitely, there's aspects when it comes to expenses, and there were a couple other spots, and I unfortunately don't have I grabbed the wrong copy, the clean copy, not my marked up one. But there were a couple of mentions of it, and so I wasn't sure about that, because we really shouldn't fall under the same rules as personnel. I mean,
Okay, let me. Do you remember which section exactly you are referring to?
well, like I said, there was a lot of talk about it in the expenses, travel.
Yep,
things
that
like
makes sense. That makes sense.
And so I'm not sure whether, but it was sort of awkward because we don't follow the same rules as far as like getting approvals and things like that. Todd doesn't actually approve our travel. Council approves the travel. And so there were just some things in there, and so I'm sorry, I will.
Yeah, if you're
well, other
talking just
people,
about
I
the
will find
harassment
it.
section, the only thing in here, I believe, that refers to the councils. We've now added you as a source for reporting violations.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to ask about,
Yes.
was that because the mayor and council are not actually employees of the city, I mean, should people be reporting to us and not, like, in my mind, I see it being, sorry, chief, going to the chief because he and the city manager are on the same tier on an org chart.
Okay. I can't say I've seen that before. Typically, it would be either the mayor or a member of city council or township board if it's a
Okay.
township.
That's fine, if that's in your professional opinion, it just seemed,
And the reason is typically, you always go up, as you know, in the org chart when you're reporting something. So we have options for people for reporting, a number of options. So there's generally male and female
Right.
individuals and individuals who either their supervisor, but when you get to somebody of Todd's, obviously you supervise Todd. You're the one who hired and fired Todd.
Right.
So, and so if there's a situation where there's somebody's to report an issue involving Todd, who would they report it to? And I think we discussed this last time, as a matter of fact, they're trying to put in a method, and I have seen in other communities where, and I put it in some other communities where it would be either to the mayor or to, again, if it's a township, if it's a village, some other form to the council itself, and those individual members, not as employees, but as the elected individuals who oversee the city. And because that individual reports to you, I don't think it would be inappropriate.
Okay.
It wouldn't be fun, I can tell you that.
Well-
Because you would then, because we have other information here where you would then probably call me and, or
Right.
legal counsel and want them
so
to
is
assist
there
you
a
in handling that.
standardized form that, like, a complaint form that somebody
I've
would
never
have?
seen a complaint form.
Or-
I mean, I've seen forms, but not under harassment policies. I've not seen a lot of.
But how does the intake of it, like, so that, like, if somebody were to come to me, how do I know that I'm asking the right questions that are legal to ask? Or
Like from a
that-
process
From
point of
a
view?
process point, I guess. I mean, would I automatically flip it to you? I mean, I guess,
You probably have as much training as most supervisors do in a lot of cities when it comes to asking what questions you should ask during that type of a situation.
okay.
So there certainly could be some training we could do for the council on, I mean, it's usually the who, what, where, when, why are you reporting this to me, what happened?
Right.
And then you would call me, and then I
Right.
would assist you with that process.
Mr. Gerard, if I may, because I think the councilwoman asked an excellent question. I know Ms. Tahar wanted to get in on this as well. It's not fun when an employee approaches any of us
No.
with a concern or a grievance. However, that historically has happened infrequently, as it should.
Oh, yes.
My approach, and this has occurred maybe a handful of times since becoming mayor. When somebody approaches me with a concern or a grievance or an issue, let's use for the sake of an example, this has never happened. It's an individual who's employed as an assistant subordinate to Terry in the clerk's office. And they're having an issue with Terry, which of course they would never have. My first question would be, have you spoken directly to the city clerk about this and tried to resolve the matter? Subsequent to that, if it's still not resolved, have you made an appointment with the city manager to discuss that? Barring those two things happening, that's the protocol that needs to be utilized.
The only exception, and I just want to take a little bit exception with
Yep,
it.
please.
The only exception I would take on that is if it was a sexual harassment complaint or a complaint involving harassment under one of these protected classifications.
And I would also add blatant, unambiguous malfeasance.
Yeah,
theft.
that kind of thing, obviously, because
Certainly.
there is the run-of-the-mill, I'm trying to get around my boss by going to the council, which you guys probably have seen all the time. But then you have when you're part of a specific complaint procedure and somebody complains about something that is unlawful, I mean, sexual harassment, harasses on the basis of race or religion, all of these are protected. It's unlawful to do this. That they need to, what we want is for them to follow the process of reporting that And to say, did you talk to the individual about this is never an appropriate response to that, because they're not required to. And in places where they have required somebody to say, well, you need to, yes, he's asked you out for a date 37 times and you keep saying no, you're just gonna have to, keep talking to him about it. That's not really the appropriate response in those types of cases. But in the run-of-the-mill things that you guys see probably a lot of the time, that is the appropriate answer. But not certainly for a sexual harassment complaint.
Right.
When you want to give as much facts as you can. And again, I do a lot of sexual harassment and training for employers and supervisors. I'd be more than happy to give you one if you guys would like one.
I think that would be helpful.
Things that you asked.
And I think her prerogative about receiving that kind of complaint and immediately contacting legal counsel is probably the appropriate protocol.
That would be the appropriate.
Mr. Hart?
Yes, so I was just going to say, and Mr. Gearbach and Ms. Mitchell can confirm or deny my memory of this, but I believe in the non-discrimination ordinance, we have a similar path if there is a matter where where a complaint might involve the city manager, that it would come to, that city council members and or the mayor would be the next tier. And we had the same sort of, yes, and of course you would instantly call the city attorney about the complaint, about how to proceed. And it was the sort of the same, as I recall, the same sort of thought process about working going up in the org chart.
And we did put that in there about remedial measures. Of course, they don't disadvantage the complaint, and can appoint other city personnel or may utilize the services of outside consultants or attorneys to conduct the review and investigation, which many times is the appropriate response, depending on what's going on.
And as I said, I believe, though I did not go back and check, that this parallels what we have in the non-discrimination
I'm sure it
ordinance.
does. Hey, Chief, come on in. Come on over, apparently. Would you like to expound on this?
Chief, if you wouldn't mind grabbing the microphone from Mr. Gerard, and then when you're done, Ms. Dillon can continue with her line of questioning.
I've seen this happen a handful of times in my career, and usually when it rises to the level of making a city council aware of a complaint, whether it's a sexual harassment or any other case, it's usually a document that's handed off to someone. So there's generally the who, what, when, where, and how has already been written out, but I would encourage you to have, I'm a fan of checklists, so if someone were to come forward and say something, is to have those 3 or 4 things just kind of at the ready that you need to know what to do to protect yourself and the city and the employee in the event someone comes forward. It doesn't have to be very in-depth.
No,
but
it doesn't.
It's just a couple bullet points just to kind of go over, and there's always an opportunity where it could come back to me once you speak to Mr. Gerard, if anything criminal came in place. But that's generally the way I've seen those happen, and sometimes they are an end around, to try to get someone's ear, and sometimes they've been very valid. So just my 2 cents worth. I hate to interject.
No, thank you.
You, Chief.
So I just want to clarify, because there was an incident in the past where there was an employee who felt that they were not being treated fairly by their supervisor, who felt compelled to come to various members of council to air their grievance. And we collectively directed them to Todd. And the employee then said, well, Todd is part of the problem because he's siding with the supervisor and not listening to the employee. So we're sort of stuck in that position then at that point, and I guess that's where, I just want to make sure we're.
Was this a union employee or a non-union employee?
This was a union employee.
Yeah, because they're union employees, they have a mechanism for if they feel like they're being treated unfairly. And it's a very negotiated union contract grievance procedure. So if they feel like they've been treated unfairly, they need to file a grievance. That's their process, because the exclusive representative for them is their union. So any complaints or issues they have should be going right through that grievance process. The difficulty is when it's a non-union because even though we have a process, a complaint procedure, it's not a negotiated procedure like you have in a union
Right.
contract.
So is there a way to create a document that's sort of like an org chart, like, okay, the first question is, are you a union employee? You say yes, then boom, this is where you go. No, then okay. And then sort of work through the process, because we have new members of council coming on board, and not everybody's gonna be at the same level to understand what the process is. And so I guess I'd really like to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what the proper procedure is. Should somebody address a council member about that, and that we're asking the right questions, or actually making sure that we're not asking the wrong things. And whether it's just, that line goes to, if you're not a union employee, call legal counsel. And it just stops
I think
there.
we could come up with something like that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I do have one other question. It's about leave.
Sure.
I've got it. There's something, and Mr. Campbell probably can know it off the top of his head. Sick leave advances. People can borrow leave.
Thank you. Up to 45 days. We have had instances in the past where an employee maybe has a non-work-related injury. They have surgery, and they're going to be out. They have rehab and the like. Maybe their job requires more physical. It's more physical in nature, and then they pay back accumulated sick leave. They pay that back, but that's been we've done it at least once, maybe twice, that I'm recalling right now since I've been here, and it's worked out fine. I mean, it was paid back, and they paid it back with as they accumulate, right? They have to they pay that back. It goes towards that 45 days or whatever that they start with.
Reaccumulated, was it automatically deducted from their
Correct.
check and then until they paid it back?
Until they paid those however many days.
So they had a balance of 0 or less than?
Right. So if they had, right, if they typically something like that, right? Family Medical Leave Act goes up, and then they're using their sick and their vacation, whatever time they have, and if depending on their balance in their banks, of course, right? So if they extinguish that or close to it, because obviously they need some sick time, like to go to doctors, follow-up doctors appointments or rehabs, those types of things. So yeah, that's how it's been. That's per policy. That's how it's been done.
Just for the record.
Why don't you come and speak in the microphone?
Each time that we have exercised that since I've been here, which I think, I got to agree with Todd, I know there's been at least 2 since you've been here, then there was 1 person before that who ended up terminating his employment prior to the payback, in which case we took that amount out of the banks that would have, like any kind of vacation banks or anything like that. So the city was made full.
Made whole, yeah.
And that is also never been granted for anything other than an extended leave. Like someone can't come in and say, hey, Dean, I want to borrow 8 hours vacation because I'm sick today or something. It's always been an extended medical leave in the absence of a short-term or medical disability policy.
Thanks, very helpful.
So, just for clarification then, so if this person, in order to exercise that 45 days, they would have to have no leave banked at all, correct? They cannot currently have like vacation time and then apply for sick leave?
No, well, typically it's sick leave, but I guess what I'm saying is medical leave, Family Medical Leave Act. People basically, if they want to get paid during that time, typically they focus on the sick time, but they can also use vacation time, whatever they might have, to make till they get paid. But this is typically I believe it's paid back solely through the sick time banks, being paid back.
With that one exception, where the gentleman ended up
Right, and then
becoming extremely ill and ended up passing away, so. But we did get it back from the vacation bank.
right.
So, Janet, your question is, at this point, we don't make a practice of having them drain all of their banks before they can borrow it. So they could still have they could still have vacation time on the books and be off for a short, up to 45 days medical. And in the instances, all three of them have been injury-related, that they couldn't, they had a number of doctor's appointments prior to a surgery, which helped drain those banks. And so then when they had to have the surgery and the time off is when they borrowed. So
by the time they borrowed it, I'm just kind of following up on here, so by the time they got to the point where they were borrowing, all of their sick leave was used up?
yes. And that happens with the new hire,
Because they haven't earned enough.
right?
And so I guess that would lead me into, so this is available to every employee from day one. So you could theoretically work one day and then borrow 45 days of leave, of sick leave.
The other thing I read here too, is that it's up to the city manager to, this isn't an automatic thing, they have to request it.
Right.
And it looks like it's up to you whether to deny it or,
Right, and you have to have a letter from the physician, I believe,
yes.
Right.
saying this is why you're gonna need to have such an extended leave. So I guess maybe theoretically, if second day on the job, you hurt yourself outside of work and we're gonna be off, we certainly would look at that, but I guess technically speaking, under the current written, that's how I read it.
You could grant it if you wanted, you wouldn't have to.
Right. But like I said, we don't get these very often. And when we do, it's for a very good reason, right? For an extended surgery and rehab and that type of thing.
So, okay, I understand that, that it's at your discretion. I guess I'm just confused as to why you would not, is it a practice to have people drain all of their leave before granting additional leave?
It depends. If it's additional paid leave, then yes, it would be, because, this is a pretty extraordinary provision here. This is not very common.
Well, that's what I'm.
And so it would be the only time I would, if I was in a city manager's position and somebody asked me, hey, I'm in this very bad state, I need these additional days because I've used up all my sick, or because I'm about to use up my sick bank, I would want them to use up all their sick leave before we granted such an extraordinary measure of allowing somebody to borrow against sick leave. Essentially, they're borrowing money from us while we're paying them under terms that aren't, they could leave tomorrow, and yes, why we could deduct everything from whatever leave. Apparently, all their sick leave is gone at that point in time. They might have some vacation we could take, but beyond that, we're kind of limited at how much money we can get back. So we could get stuck,
I guess
in a
that's the point I'm getting
we could
at,
get
is
stuck.
theoretically you could be stuck.
You could, which is why my guess is, if it was me, I wouldn't, it would have to be pretty extraordinary circumstances before I would approve this, if I was in your spot.
Sure. Again, the one that I'm thinking of, again, it's either once or at least once, maybe twice, but the one that I'm recalling is that came back and said, the doctor said it's going to be this many days, right? This many days is going to exceed, it was more than 12 weeks for Family Medical Leave Act, and then because of the type of surgery that this person had, and so that played into saying, okay, yes, we would do that, but it's not, again, fortunately I don't have a long history of these requests, but what I can say, it is one that it's scrutinized. It's not just okay, you're requesting it, rubber stamp and move forward.
Well, the other reason these are frankly not very common anymore is because most places now have short-term and long-term disability, so you don't need to have these kind of banks.
Right. Well, that was going to be the lead-in of, should we be considering moving to
And we are.
to a short-term
Just so you know, we are.
Okay.
We've already gotten quotes. We're already looking at
Okay.
moving in as this
Okay.
part of a process.
If I may, Councilman Dillon,
Yes.
can I follow up on that? So then would it be premature to remove that at this juncture?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think, but at some future time, we're going to be, I think, looking at we're doing it right now with some of the union negotiations, but going forward, I think we're going to be looking at some significant changes to the sick leave benefit here in exchange for coming up with some short and long-term disability to meet those needs, which I think is the way that most people are doing that now, and is much more cost-effective and frankly works a lot better.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Councilwoman Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. I do have the old manual because that's where all my questions are written. So I will do my best to be clear. I think I'm on section 4.07, around that area. And I just want to double check, when this is talking about a drug-free workplace, can we legally ban medical marijuana?
Yes.
We can.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
At least now you can. The court may change that in Michigan. But
it's
at
Supreme
least,
Court.
yeah. The
Right.
Supreme Court may, but at least for right now you can.
Okay. And then is recreational marijuana legally a controlled substance?
It is still marijuana in general, regardless of whether it's recreational or got through a dispensary, is considered a controlled substance under federal law, which is the law that governs controlled substances. However, it is legal to use in Michigan and legal to possess within certain, parameters now.
So if an employee is reading this, do they go by federal law or so it doesn't say anything specific, at least the copy that I have. It just says illegal drugs.
Let me get to
4.07, the old,
well, you need to go to the drug-free, actually, you need to look at the,
it says drug-free workplace.
yep, and we have that policy.
Oh, following?
It lists the amount, I think, somewhere.
It is in here, I believe it's in
It
here.
is, because I remember seeing opioids and stuff.
Let me see.
Drugs to be tested for is page A-2.
Thank you.
Is this an appendix?
Oh, in an appendix, okay.
Let me just really quick into that so I
Oh,
can
yeah,
make
yeah.
sure because I want to answer your question, because this is, as you know, an area of the law that is,
Flux.
flux is a great word.
Right.
That's a great word.
So I there's a difference between being tested for
There we go. Yes, Appendix A
And-
is the drug-free workplace
and,
policy.
okay. So there's a difference between what's an illegal drug and what is tested for. Is that right?
Yes, because in B, well, I'm just going to the policy statement. What we've done, and what I've generally done with the policies, unless the client wants to do something different, is we've said the illegal possession of drugs, marijuana, alcohol, or narcotics. We've actually added the word marijuana to this spot because you can't simply just say illegal drugs anymore,
Right.
because that would be confusing, because now I don't believe that the phrase illegal drugs includes marijuana anymore in Michigan.
Right.
You have to be very clear about it.
Okay.
So when you look at our policy, it includes, like, for example, B, city employees are prohibited from the use, possession, and sale of, before it said just drugs, alcohol, or any controlled substance. Now it says illegal drugs, marijuana, alcohol, and any other controlled substance.
So I guess this is a good place. There's a lot of flipping back and forth, which I totally understand. It might help shortcut some things. Does this section need some kind of reference, or does it need to include the list just for clarity? Because
It says the city's drug-free workplace policy is contained in Appendix A and further provides details related to the city's drug-free workplace policies.
okay, I'm just looking for that.
That's right at the very end of 4.07.
Oh, okay.
That was current language. We didn't touch
I
that.
see, okay, all right, no, that helps
But,
me.
but you ask a good question. Is it too confusing to say, okay, somebody might read this? I mean, again, it's a big topic. So
Right.
we had a section called drug-free workplace because we're talking about all these different issues that are related to conduct, breaks, courtesy, personal appearance, drug-free workplace. Is it better to not put anything in here and just see,
I know.
you know?
That was just, and so what I saw is that I would have questions there and then be thinking, oh, I don't have any more information and not even get this far. So, and I don't have a suggestion, I'm just asking and I trust whatever you say. So I don't know how you want to approach that or the group wants to approach it. But that was one question
Well,
there.
this is my personal opinion is this is an awful long document for employees to digest.
Yeah,
To be honest, which is why, but it's a great, you have to have personnel policy, you have to have a personnel policy manual. But a lot of employers also then take their personal policy manual and perhaps come up with an employee handbook or something for, and I talked to Todd about this a couple weeks ago, where you come up with, a personnel policy handbook that is much shorter than this, that contains the major things that you want to make sure that employees have access to at their fingertips. A small little document, now this is.
right. A
This
handy
is 30
guide.
pages long, but 12 pages long, or 20 pages long.
Right.
This is a 100-page document.
Right, and
While
just,
but you need it because you need to have these policies. This is as much for administration and for the supervisors who are administering these policies it is for the people who have to follow them.
right,
So
Right.
that's just a suggestion a lot of my clients have done, just to have something a little bit easier to digest on a day-to-day basis for employees.
and I would just like to say that I also would like to have the procedure written down of, if we have this kind of complaint, this is what we should do. And I don't know if, do we have like a good governance section for council? I don't know, but I will need that because I can see myself in the moment, thinking, oh my gosh, where is it written down? How do I do that? I want to be a sympathetic ear, but I can't say, of course, you're right, that did happen.
Yes, no, we don't.
Right. So I did a little risk management in
Okay,
healthcare for a
okay.
while. So then I guess, so ooh, it got loud all of a sudden. So under employee responsibilities,
What page?
so
What
in,
section? Well, we do section.
I know, right? Okay, so in the old one, it was page 19, the actual bottom, and then it like prohibited activity. There isn't a section. It's after prohibited activity.
What was somewhere?
This is where I wonder if the pagination needs to be somehow, because I honestly don't know which section that is. It's a little hard for me to. Okay, so under harassment, 4.15, and then it's quite a few sections down. Prohibited activity. So my general question was, because we do have this non-discrimination ordinance, do we need to specifically call that out and just say, and again, it's a question, I don't have an opinion, but should we more loudly refer to that ordinance?
Yes, we should, and I thought that we did, so,
And maybe I missed it.
It may not be under the harassment section where it's referred to, but I will find it for you.
Yeah, so under discrimination of that list that Ms. Terhar was saying, we needed to add gender and gender identity. that's where I have the note, like, do we need to specifically have our ordinance listed here? And if I apologize, it might already be there, but,
It's in 3.01.
okay,
It was specific, under our equal employment opportunity, it's specifically listed in accordance with ordinance number 793, adopted on March 5th, 2015.
Okay.
It's a policy of the city of Saline. And then it goes through,
and forgive,
gender identity/expression is listed
okay.
in that.
So then this, coming later,
This should actually, the intent was that the equal employment opportunity one would be identical to that one as far as.
Okay.
But the topic itself is slightly different.
Okay.
Because equal employment opportunity encompasses a large number of issues. Harassment is just one narrow focus of it.
I see. Okay. So I just was raising the question. Let's see, page 32 of our packet, it's section 5.04. This has to do with merit.
Those merit bonuses.
Right. So I just want to confirm, at this point, is it true that we're looking at our structure of raises? Is that correct? Is that part of the organizational development or no? The organizational review, pardon me.
Compensation.
Compensation review, right, compensation study, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
It is not.
So, I'm sorry, I meant the organizational review. I think there was a recommendation
To do one.
to clarify and overhaul that section, but that isn't being done at this time. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
If I may.
Yeah.
Mr. Gearbaugh's memory might be similar. I believe the recommendation was to engage an outside firm or entity to do a compensation analysis.
Oh, that's right. Okay, thank you.
I mean, personally, we can talk more about that at a later juncture. I think that's something we need to commit to doing before the end of the calendar year.
Right. I just, when it brought up compensation, I just want to clarify where in the mix that's happening.
This would be a part of that study, because that's part of the compensation, because you're looking at all, if you look at, usually compensation studies look at not only wages, but benefits as well.
Okay.
So the whole long-term, short-term,
Right.
we should include as part of that. And that's
Right.
kind of what my general idea was too,
I
because
think
all
so.
of that needs to be
Yep.
a part of it.
Okay. So then I'm ready to move on to section 5.16. It's right before section 5.17. Employees are legally entitled to review their personnel records upon reasonable notice, generally not more than twice per year. And again, so is there a situation where someone might need to look at their record more than twice a year?
There might be a situation. I would never deny somebody the right to look at their personnel record, but that is right out of the ability of employees to review their personnel files under the Bullard Plowecki Employee Right to Know Act.
Okay.
It's a Michigan statute that is very detailed about when you can look at your personnel file. What they don't want is somebody to constantly be harassing the employer by saying every day, hey, I want to look at my file.
Of course.
So that gives you some maximums, but I would never deny an employee who wants to look at their personnel file ever.
Right. So is what you said, is that clear from this reading? Or is it elsewhere? Or do we need to what do we need to say so that our actual practice matches?
Well, it says generally not more than twice per year. Have we ever had anybody want to review their file more than, that you're aware of?
So,
More than even once or twice? I mean, if somebody asks for a copy of their personnel file, we have to provide it to them.
Okay.
And no matter how many times they ask or they want their personnel file, we have to make a copy of it. We can charge them a reasonable charge, but we
Okay.
have to provide it.
If I may, the primary genesis for wanting to review your personnel file would be exploring other job opportunities?
That could be one. That could be one big one.
Well, all right.
See what's in there, but in the event that I leave and somebody asks for my personnel file.
Or just, I was written up and I don't remember,
That could be it too.
right.
so,
Or I don't trust my employer, what did my supervisor put in my file that I don't know about?
Right,
There
so,
could be somebody who's
so
concerned about that.
I just want to make sure that it's clear to an employee that they do have the opportunity more than twice a year, and I just don't know if that language, I don't know what to do. I don't know. It seems like that is telling me, when I read something that says generally not more than twice a year, I'm like, oh, so I'd have to be dead, or, like, I take that really seriously.
That's what the reading of the law says.
Uh-huh.
And that's what it says in the statute.
Right.
But if you want to be completely open about it, we can eliminate that part of it. I mean, it's not,
Well, and
not I mean,
yeah,
totally up to what you guys would like to do.
I saw that, and I wanted to make sure that what we're doing in practice is reflected, and I don't know how council feels about it. I don't have a strong opinion of, but that's my sole interest in raising that question.
Are you waiting for comments?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, do we need to pursue this further, or are we ready to leave it? I guess that's my,
I don't have an objection to the way it is.
okay,
I guess
okay.
if I were a person looking to review my personnel record, generally, not more than twice per year, wouldn't, in my mind, stop me from asking for it 4
Okay.
times.
Okay,
I mean, generally just means
generally,
generally.
right. So then I would like to go to section 6.02, please. It should be on page 36 of the manual itself, around there. And it's talking about due process of charges. This due process requires oral or written notice of the charges, an explanation of the evidence, and an opportunity for the employee to respond to the charges and clear his or her name. I wonder under what situation we would only have an oral notice of the charges. Like, it seems in the interest of documentation that we would always have written.
I can't imagine a situation where there wouldn't be written. I mean, I think about, you're talking about a discharge situation or a significant
Right.
discipline, whether it be suspension, whatever it happens to be, it would have to be either suspension or a discharge, where prior to the hearing, they're not given some sort of a written explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I work with the city, I know our processes here and what we do before all of these.
Right.
We always provide a written notice.
So, and again, it's just in the interest of that our actual practice matches the handbook. So do we want to just say it requires written notice, or is it acceptable?
Well, when you're dealing with due process, you're really dealing with a constitutional issue, because due process, because our employees are public employees, they're protected by the Constitution, so they have a right to due process before they're, remember, the right to due process before you're deprived of life, liberty, or property, and public employment is deemed a property right. So before you can deprive them, you have to have a due process before that's done. There's many cases where they were only given oral notice of the charge and it was fine. I wouldn't ever recommend that. I mean, I would always recommend that it be written.
Right. Well, that's the
My
question.
recommendation is it would always be written, and that's language that was in there. I don't know if this oral or written is referring to City Code Section 2.72. Do you see that there? If it is, perhaps we should look at that and then see whether it's just setting out what that section says.
Right.
If not, we could certainly, eliminate the oral or part and just put written notice, because, again, I would never suggest ever that good process would be to just give oral notice.
Exactly. So just I appreciate information there. And then the 6.03 on that same page, exit interview. Exit interviews are at the discretion of the city. So we don't have a policy that one should always be,
We encourage it, but it's not required.
okay. Is that the norm?
That's pretty normal.
Okay.
It's nice to do them if you can do them, but there are times when you probably don't want to do one.
I think that's the end of my questions. Thanks.
Very good. Councilmember Gearbox.
I really only have one question. It deals with nepotism and management plan. I think it's section 3.08 on page 109. It's really about the process, and it allows the city manager to make an exception to allow related individuals to supervise each other. I don't know where we would, or why we want to keep that in as even a potential policy. I gotta find page 109 again.
Page 14.
Thanks.
14.
The numbering is all,
Yeah, it's 3.08.
Right. It's 14 of the 219. 14. Or it's page 8 of the actual manual.
Of the clean copy.
Of the clean copy.
I thought I had page 109.
I gave up on the other one 'cause I was just.
The new copy is it.
Oh, here it is. It's on a different section. Anyways, it says to the point of, and I wish I can read it if I can find it. Thank you. The city manager may exempt individuals, let me start out. Employees are required to report such relationships to city manager immediately. Failure to do so results in discipline, but city manager may exempt individuals from this policy as such an exemption is believed to be in the best interest of the city. Individuals who are appointed officers or employees. However, direct supervisory relationships between relatives will require the approval of city manager. I don't see any situation where we would ever want to have that scenario where you would ever grant it, and even to give that exception. Because normally, whenever I've seen it, we've come up with a management plan. The individual has to have a supervisor that is completely different than,
That is certainly recommended.
yeah. And so, from my perspective, I'd like to see that striked and somehow.
I have no problem with that.
I think that's an old holdover from a long
Is.
time ago.
Mr. Gearbox, you'd strike the section in its entirety, so 3.08, just nepotism and personal
No,
relationship?
I think it's really more that last part, because there potentially could be the fact that someone could be hired. I don't want to discourage that. I just don't want the person that's related to them supervising them, but I also don't want any situation where they directly are related and supervising. And in this case, it does give that option. I'd rather just take that right out of the hands of the city manager, so he doesn't even need to have to be approached for that.
I have no objection. Anybody object to that modification? Nope, okay, change to be made. Anything else, Mr. Gearbox?
No, my only other comment is, and I think we're going to be dealing with that with compensation and everything else, is I think the eye-opener for me was looking at time off and balances and all those type of things that are in here. And I think if we can come up with a more, I think, beneficial to both employees and to the city, I think we'll need to address those more as we move forward. At this point, there's so many things in here that we're learning. I think just getting this in place and moving it forward is a great step.
Councilman Mitchell, do you have one last question?
No, thank you.
No? Okay. Well, let me ask this question. Well, first of all, I would expect the city manager to connect with Councilwoman McClellan to discuss what transpired this evening and to address any questions and concerns that she has. Are council members prepared, noting the few changes that Mr. Gerard will make, to consider this as an action item at our next meeting, or would you, do you require additional discussion and thought prior to acting? Councilman Miller.
So what currently is our time frame for adjusting compensation?
Adjusting compensation?
Well, we're talking about moving to a short-term disability, things like that. I mean, it would be nice to have one comprehensive new manual go out instead of putting one out and then in 3 months redoing it.
I agree, but I think one of the issues that was discussed 2 weeks ago is that our approach has not, historically, in the last 5, 6 years, has not been as flexible as perhaps we would like it to be. So as things change and we make policy decisions, there are sections that are going to be changing and being modified with this document. I mean, I think in all likelihood, it's kind of a living, breathing organism.
And the other thing I may say is, some of this is subject to collective bargaining, which has their own timetables, which we don't really have a lot of control over sometimes. And I think this is something that it'd be nice to move on to at least get a document in place. We certainly can make changes as you feel necessary.
Now, Mr. Gerard, correct me if I'm wrong, to Councilman Dillon's question. As it relates to short and long-term disability, we could have clarity on that issue in the next couple months. Does that seem realistic?
We could, absolutely.
Obviously, as it relates to a compensation study, I think we would want to engage an outside individual or entity to do that evaluation. So that's going to take much longer. But as I indicated just moments ago, my goal would be to engage a service and begin that process sometime before the end of this calendar year.
And employees are clear that this document is a revolving document, that even though they're hired under this document, when it changes, they apply to the new. That's stated
Oh, yeah,
very
we make sure
clearly that
that's
they
very
understand.
clear. Yes.
We roll out anytime we change.
They have to re-sign for
They
it.
have to
Exactly,
okay,
that's right.
just clarifying that that's the case.
So what's the group's pleasure? Would you like this as an action item, or would you like to discuss it again 2 weeks from tonight?
I'm ready to go.
You ready to go, Mr. Gearbox?
I'm ready to go. I think the
Okay.
legal piece is.
Councilwoman Dillon, you?
Are we action iteming it tonight?
No,
Okay.
definitely not. I would be action item, I would add this as an action item enumerated on the agenda 2 weeks from tonight, our second meeting in August.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Good with that? Mr. Steele, you good with that?
I am, although I still think I ought to abstain from voting,
That's up to you.
as it applies to me.
Mayor Pro Tem Hart?
Yes,
Very good. The other thing that I would ask, because this was noted at our last meeting, is we are probably, in all honesty, a year and a half, 2 years behind in this process. It probably should have been initiated in 2017. So what I would ask the clerk to do is make note. I think about every 2 years, we should probably revisit this issue, but I would also rely on staff and legal counsel that if something more pressing or time-sensitive comes up, that you connect
We
with us.
certainly will do that,
Yeah,
yes.
so that we can make the necessary changes or at least consider them. The other thing that I made note of is it seems like there was broad consensus to do 2 additional things. One, to develop, subsequent to this document being adopted, an employee handbook, a more abbreviated version
I think that would be a great idea.
of the more substantial, significant items. And then, Steve, I think this would come from your office, perhaps a 1-page document that outlines to council the appropriate protocol. when
Yes,
they
I will put
receive
that
a
together.
complaint About harassment or inappropriate behavior in the workplace.
Yes, I will put that together.
In the interim, if you do have questions, concerns, please direct them to the city manager. Like I said just moments ago, I hope to connect with Councilwoman McClellan and expect to see this as an enumerated action item at our next meeting on
18th?
19.
19th.
Mr. Mayor? So for the employee handbook, who do we envision producing that? Are we asking Mr. Gerard to do that, or are we seeing that as a task for staff?
I guess I'd like to have a subsequent conversation with the city manager about that. I would envision maybe an ad hoc committee of staff members working with Steve Gerard's office to develop something.
Okay, thanks.
That seem reasonable to you?
Sounds good.
More abbreviated. Yeah, yeah.
As
yeah,
long
okay.
as there's
Anything further,
professional
friends?
advice involved.
Then the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn the work meeting at 7 PM.
So moved?
Moved by Gearba, is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, this meeting is adjourned. Mr. Gerard, thank you.